This is a unrehearsed video I'm putting together for a friend, a colleague, to explain something we were talking about that I was saying would be a simple experiment people could do to gain an understanding of how you can have attractive and repulsive magnetic forces at microwave frequencies. And it's supposed to be something that college students or researchers in corporate laboratories, university laboratories, government laboratories could all be doing to become familiar with magnetic attraction and repulsion at microwave frequencies. So as I rehearsed it in my head, what I was going to talk about, I realized it's not really that simple of an experiment, and there's a lot more details and related information I need to provide to help people understand. Let me just start by describing the basic experiment I was talking to them about. If you have a toroid of ferrite or some kind of magnetic material, and you put a loop of wire around it, through it, and generate current flow and create a magnetic field, then the magnetic flux will travel around the interior of the toroid, and the strength of the magnetic field would be more or less equal to the magnetic field generated by the wire, and then the additional amount of magnetic field based on the real permeability of the magnetic material. So like if you had a permeability of 10, then you would have a magnetic field strength internal to the toroid that would be 10 times stronger than what you would have with just the magnetic field around the wire itself. So magnetic materials have two types of permeability and magnetism. One is what you normally describe as the real permeability, and then you have imaginary permeability, which we don't usually deal with until you get up at really high frequencies. So the real permeability is just what you get around in this particular instance, around the interior of the toroid. If you get really high in frequency, up in microwave frequency range, then the individual uncompensated electrons responsible for the magnetism of the material, if you zoom in on them, in this particular instance, you have, let me draw it over here, you have electrons and their spin axis, what you normally call the z-axis, I believe, for most quantum physicists. They'd all be more or less oriented this way for this particular diagram, where the front part of the toroid material, magnetic material, has a magnetic field oriented in this direction. Then it would be caused by all these spins pointing this way. And then you have imaginary permeability, which is related to the tendency of these things to precess. So besides having your main z-axis magnetic field pointing that way, you also have another component that is often an angle and has a tendency to precess around in a circle like a wobbling top or gyroscope. So you can interface to the imaginary permeability of this material or any magnetic material if you have like a microwave antenna hooked up to a microwave generator, and you stimulate the material at the resonant frequency of its tendency to wobble or gyrate. This would normally be something you do with commercially available electron paramagnetic resonant test equipment. This is called electron spin resonance or paramagnetic resonance. The stronger the real magnetic field is, the higher the frequency these tend to wobble or gyrate or precess. So if you have a generator and you're generating around microwave frequencies and you sweep past the frequency that these things want to wobble at, then you'll see an increase in how much the material will absorb, or in some cases reflect, the magnetic field at those frequencies. So my suggestion of how people can get used to magnetic repulsion and attraction at microwave frequencies has to do with using a couple of these. So in a device like this, where you have the imaginary permeability or the phenomena that causes those characteristics of imaginary permeability and microwave frequencies, the wobbling or gyrating precession of all the unpaired electrons in this device. In this particular case, all around the toroid, you're going to have a component that's going around this way. So this direction of magnetism is not staying stationary, it's going around like this. So if you go around the whole perimeter of the toroid, then all around the sides they're sweeping like this. Maybe not all in unison, because you'll have like spin waves of delay in any direction other than right where you're stimulating it. To see the most measurable effect of the suggested experiment I'm making, you would need to possibly stimulate this toroid with possibly 3 different microwave sources on 3 different sides with some type of microwave antenna, either maybe a rectangular or square or circular horn antenna hooked to generator. So these guys would all come back, and just by stimulating it on 3 equal sides, I didn't draw it very well, but by stimulating it on 3 equal sides, you increase the chance of getting all of these to be turning inward or outward, all in sync with each other, rather than this part all kind of spinning up and this one delayed some unknown amount, so it's not really pointing up at the same time this is pointing up. The goal is to have all of them sweeping up or down all the way around the circumference of the toroid, more or less in unison. So they're all sweeping in through the center and up at the same time, or the other way, sweeping down at the same time. So when you create a situation like that, then you're not generating very much electric field component. It's mainly a magnetic field component that is going to be going up and down as those all sweep around. And so you'll have magnetic fields that are toggling direction, getting stronger and then weaker, and same in this direction. All happening at the resonant frequency set by the magnetic field strength of your, this is just showing a one turn, you could have several turns, whatever it is that, or you could even have a permanent magnet, magnetic material that's a permanent magnet, and at the same time that permanent real magnetic field direction and permeability is setting the frequency that it would have a tendency to precess when stimulated by microwave antennas and cause magnetic fields that radiate up and down. So my suggestion is that two of these apparatus side by side or one below the other, I hope I'm getting that on the screen. Okay, so if you have two of these setups and each one, I'm not going to draw it all, but if each one is like this, if they're stimulated like on three sides with a microwave generator, then you can make these magnets pull together or push apart at the amount determined by the phase. If you have the same generator driving both circuits, but this one is going through extra cable, for example, just to act like a delay line. So you're setting the phase of how all these precessing electrons are coming around relative to these, then you can adjust how much the two devices either pull together or push apart. So at a point in time where this one is radiating, for example, north, and the north propagates out and reaches this magnet at the same time that a south is radiating down, then that north, in this example I actually have a north facing a north right here, so I'll just talk about that. If the north reaches this one at the same time this one is propagating a north downward, then they'll get a repulsive force between the two. If you adjust the phase of the microwave signal stimulating the lower toroid such that it's generating a south, it's toggling one way or the other, and it's generating a south up at the same time this one's generating north down, then they'll feel an attractive force for each other. And this is dependent not only on the phasing of how you're stimulating the lower toroid versus the upper one, but it's also dependent on the distance between them as to when their signals are crossing each other. For example, if you have a microwave frequency with a wavelength of, say, 10 centimeters, and then you, did that show up on the board? Yeah, that's showing up. Okay, so 10 centimeters is your lambda, and then you go the distance of 10 or 15, let's say example 15 centimeters between the two, then you're going to have 1.5 wavelengths, and so obviously the time it takes for one's magnetic field source signal to reach the other is going to change by 180 degrees phase shift just because of the distance between them. And so hopefully you get the picture. If you're hopefully my friend, this is for, and anyone else watching will understand what I'm talking about there, where it's not only the phasing that you're driving one versus the other, but the distance between them both affect when and where they're going to either pull or push against each other. And this whole experiment is just to demonstrate you can have magnetic pulling and pushing at microwave frequencies. It's something that's applicable to making microwave motors, and it's also something applicable, which is the main purpose of my conversation with my friend, to help people to understand my theory of where gravity comes from. And if you're watching this video and you haven't watched my other videos, to really understand the background of all this, you need to watch the 3 other videos where gravity comes from. It's my contention that all elements, all matter that's making up celestial bodies like the Earth, generate gravity by, in fact, having a natural emission of magnetic fields like this that are going to come from all atoms, because as orbital electrons move in their orbitals around nuclei of atoms, they are precessing. It's a natural tendency. This is all described in the other video in much more detail. And if you're just watching this for the first time, you may immediately say, well, you can't apply that classical point of view, because any radiated energy would just radiate away and you lose all the mass of your electrons. And so my contention is all electrons everywhere are doing that, but they're also absorbing the same amount of energy they're losing. They're also absorbing from all other radiating electrons, and that creates a vast sea of standing waves throughout the universe, and that establishes gravity. And the similar activity occurs within nuclei of quarks or whatever it is that's making up protons and neutrons. This same type of phenomena occurs at much, much higher frequencies, and that sea of standing waves throughout the universe, from those are what is responsible for inertia. So all of this is described in detail also on the Vasant Corporation website. You can go VASANT Corporation.com, and it'll tell you all about it. Or watch my other videos on YouTube. It'll tell you all about it. So some of the other things that make this experiment a little more complicated that I need to go into also is natural tendency with the usual lab setup. If you're sending much microwave power to these toroids, they're just going to heat up. Just like if you put them in a microwave and turn it on, it's going to absorb a lot of heat and heat up and cook them and destroy them. So in order to replicate what I'm suggesting in a way that can be useful in real-world applications, you have to power it with a unique form of electrical power. And so I need to take a minute and go into that. And so I'm going to go ahead and erase all this. You can back up, rewind, and look at it all again if you want to review what I was saying about the toroids. So now I'm going to talk about what we use to power all that. So I want to discuss what I would call hot and cold electricity. All the electricity we use in the world right now, I would describe that as hot electricity. And you're familiar with what connotations that is all about. If you run it through a resistor, it gets hot. So best way to describe this is all related to my research that started decades ago on supposedly free energy devices that were generating electricity from no apparent source. If you want to know more about my background and my research on all that, you have to study various pages on the Vesant Corporation website. It's my contention that since the 1920s, there have been people making devices that successfully tapped into the sea of standing waves among all matter and tapped off some of that energy. In doing so, the local parts of their electromagnetic devices lose energy that normally you would have an equal amount of energy radiated away and received by all matter. In unique devices, there are ways to absorb local very small amounts of that energy. And to the extent, let me back up. One thing that causes, or the main thing that causes all electrons everywhere to have an equal amount of angular momentum are this exchange of standing waves among all of them everywhere in the universe. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's like a ball you can have spun up. It's designed to exercise with. So you pull a string on it to get it wound up. And then if you gyrate it in your hand, you can make it spin faster. So the signal from your hand muscles doing this on it will cause its spin rate to increase. So that's kind of synonymous, or a good analogy of what's going on with charged particles like the electron, for example. The signals radiated and received between all of them keeps them spun up to a specific amount of angular momentum that ends up being approximately equal for all of them. So if you create a device that is successful at tapping off some of that exchanged energy, then to the extent that you've tapped off and you're using some of that electrical power, that's power that's lost to their exchange, and to that extent, the angular momentum of the local group of electrons that are involved, they're going to lose extremely small amount of angular momentum. And the electricity from such a device, I call that cold electricity because it does not behave the same as your typical electrical power source. This is getting into more and more details that are hard to describe. When things at the atomic level, subatomic level, are moving through space, they also move through time. There's a chapter on a book I wrote, Spin Wave Technology, about 20 years ago, that describes how things move through time. And you can read that at the Vesant Corporation website also. So when you pull off some of that energy, you're affecting how the particles are moving through time at the subatomic level, and you're actually causing a very slight phase shift in the motion of the particles through time. So rather than, if you're a physicist, if you have a degree in physics, you may be aware that you could describe a positron or any form of antimatter as being the same as matter, except going in the opposite direction in time. So if you understand that, it's kind of a new concept, but it's actually possible to make just a very slight phase shift in the direction something's moving in time rather than the completely opposite direction. The equations that describe that are in that chapter about how things actually move through time. I don't want to get into all of that on the video, but it's critical to understanding how something like this really works. to study the chapter on how things move through time. So when you extract power from one of these, quote, free energy devices, it is, in a way, phase shifting a very small amount how the particles are moving through time. And to that extent, it's kind of like an antimatter reactor, only because the very slight change into a very, very slightly more negative direction of motion is kind of like extracting power from combining matter and antimatter, and it releases pure energy. So it's kind of like that. The math is not like most people think nowadays. It's not an all or nothing. It's not only in one direction in time or only the reverse direction in time. There's actually other very slight phase shift adjustment you can make to how things move through time. And I'd rather not get into all of that in this video, so please just read the chapters or the information about how things move through time that's on the Resonant Corporation website, and it gives you equations and everything to describe better what I'm talking about. So the point I'm trying to make is to power a device like I described earlier to experiment with attractive and repulsive phenomena, magnetic repulsion and attraction at microwave frequencies, and not have your test setup overheat. You need to power it with one of these, quote, free energy devices, which is a whole nother subject. You've got to first make one that actually works in order to move on and do the next step of testing these. You may be able to do all this testing at low power levels with just conventional electricity, but you'll have a lot more success if you have one of these devices that's extracting very small amount of power from the standing waves that fill the universe, which output what I call cold electricity, which successfully power these devices without them overheating. And if you understood everything I've said so far, in the next diagram I'm going to show, hopefully you'll understand this, how it all fits in to some things that physicist named Bob Lazar discussed many decades ago in the very late 1980s and early 1990s. He described the device that does what I'm talking about, more or less. He described an anti-gravity craft. This is extremely crude, not very accurate diagram, but he described a device that used what he called gravity emitters or gravity amplifiers, 3 of them, and they were in fact sets of toroid magnetic material. I'm not drawing it very well at all. There's more than 4 of them actually. I'm running out of room to draw, so I'm not drawing more than 4. And these were each one stimulated on 3 sides by microwave antenna. Same for this one, and this one. And those went back to microwave power equipment. And there were 3 of them. I'm not doing a very good job drawing, but there's 3 sets of toroids here, here, and here. Each one went to its own microwave equipment that generates the power and controls the phase of the signals to these toroid magnets. These guys are generating microwave frequency magnetic fields that go out this way. They're alternating. Same with the one that's here, the one that's here. Please excuse my very, very crude drawing. And these guys all get their power from, I'm just going to draw that over here so I have room to draw your power source. A power source that Bob Lazar called an Animator Reactor. The power out of this was tapped off and sent to these three guys to power them, and a microwave signal came out of this and was tapped off and went to each of these, and that's what was used as a signal source for your microwave power equipment. So this is just a free energy device. He called it an antimatter reactor, and in a way it is, because it did generate a very slight phase shift in how the local group of matter moves through time as part of the process of extracting the electricity. So it generated what I call cold electricity, which powered the three microwave sets of microwave equipment, which in turn powered these devices that Bob Lazar referred to as gravity emitters or gravity amplifiers. So if you're doing an experiment in a lab and you want to do it at high power levels, you have to be successful at making this guy first, or an equivalent to it, to generate the power to drive your microwave equipment. It's possible, we've been doing it, or secret parts of our government, I believe, have been doing it for decades. I'm just suggesting that anyone in any lab at any university